The morning it happened, Oliver Beckett was running 12 minutes late. That was unusual for him. In 41 years of practicing law, first as an associate grinding through 80-hour weeks, then as a named partner at Beckett and Farrow, Oliver had never once been late to a client meeting. His assistant, a sharp young woman named Priya, used to joke that he arrived so consistently that the building's security guards set their watches by him. 7:52, every morning, through the revolving glass doors on Madison Avenue. Never 7:51, never 7:53. But that Tuesday in October, Oliver was 12 minutes behind because he had stopped to watch a boy fix a bicycle chain. The boy was maybe 9 years old, crouched beside a silver bike on the sidewalk outside Oliver's brownstone in Cobble Hill. He had a smear of grease across his left cheek and the focused, serious expression of someone performing surgery. Oliver had walked past, stopped, walked back, and spent the next 10 minutes helping the kid work the chain back onto the sprocket. They didn't exchange more than a dozen words. The boy said thank you, Oliver said you're welcome, and that was that. He didn't think about it again until much later, when he understood that those 12 minutes had saved his life. Oliver had built those 12 minutes had saved his life. Oliver had built his reputation on mergers and acquisitions, the kind of high-stakes corporate work that rarely made headlines but moved serious money. His firm occupied the 14th floor of a building off Park Avenue, and his name on the letterhead was enough to make opposing counsel pause before filing certain motions. He had a daughter named Claire who lived in Portland, and called every Sunday, a house in Connecticut that he visited on weekends, and a marriage of 26 years that had, somewhere in the last 4 of them, gone quietly wrong. Her name was Margaret, Maggie, when things were good between them. She was 53, slim and careful in the way she carried herself. With dark hair she'd started threading with silver and hadn't bothered to hide. She was intelligent, more than most people gave her credit for, and she had spent the first 20 years of their marriage building a life around his. Then she had spent the last 6 realizing she resented it. Oliver knew the marriage was strained. What he didn't know, what he had no reason to suspect, was that his wife had begun meeting a man named Drew Callender 6 months earlier, and that together they had made a decision that had nothing to do with divorce lawyers or asset division. They had made a different kind of decision entirely. The boy's name was Theo, short for Theodore, though he hated that and would correct anyone who used it. He was 9 years and 4 months old, and he lived with his grandmother, Vera, in a rent-controlled apartment on the 3rd floor of a building 2 blocks from Oliver's brownstone. Vera worked the early shift at a dry cleaner's and was usually gone by 6 in the morning, which meant spent the first hour of his day alone, eating cereal, watching the street from the kitchen window. He was a quiet kid, the kind adults called mature, when what they meant was self-contained. He had learned to observe things carefully because observation was free and he had a lot of time. He noticed which neighbors kept irregular hours and which kept strict ones. He noticed the black sedan that had started parking on the block 3 weeks ago. He noticed the woman with the dark hair who sometimes came out of the brownstone with the green shutters and stood on the steps making phone calls instead of going inside to make them. He had noticed her before Oliver ever noticed him. The 12 minutes Oliver lost helping Theo with the bicycle meant that he arrived at his building at 8:04 instead of 7:52. It also meant that when he stepped off the elevator onto the 14th floor, he walked directly into what appeared to be a conversation that stopped the moment he appeared. 2 men standing near his office door. One was his junior partner, a man named Garrett Foss, holding a coffee cup and looking at the floor. The other was Drew Callender. Oliver didn't know Drew Callender. He had seen the man once, possibly twice. At firm events, Margaret had insisted they attend. Tall, somewhere in his mid-40s, the kind of tan that came from somewhere warm and deliberate. He worked in private equity, or said he did. Oliver had no reason to file him under anything more than a peripheral acquaintance of Margaret's social circle. Drew, Oliver said, because it would have been strange not to. Oliver. Drew shook his hand, with the particular warmth of a man performing warmth. I had a breakfast meeting in the building. Garrett said, you might have 5 minutes. Oliver did not have 5 minutes, and everyone in that hallway knew it. But he showed Drew into his office anyway, because 41 years of reading people had taught him that the interesting question was never what someone said. It was why they'd come at all. Drew talked for 12 minutes about nothing. He mentioned a real estate deal he was structuring, asked Oliver's opinion on a zoning question that was either genuine or a cover story, and left with a handshake and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Oliver walked him to the elevator, came back and sat at his desk for a moment before Priya appeared in the doorway. That was strange, she said. Yes, Oliver agreed. It was. He put it in a mental drawer and moved on, because he had 3 client calls and a brief to review and a life that did not, at that moment, seemed like one in need of examination. Theo found the piece of paper on a Wednesday. He hadn't been looking for anything. He'd been cutting through the alley, behind his grandmother's building on the way home from school. The same shortcut he always took, when he heard voices from the other side of the wooden fence that separated the alley from the small private lot, behind the brownstone with the green shutters. He recognized one of the voices, the woman with the dark hair. He'd heard her out here before, talking on the phone, pacing. This time she wasn't on the phone. She was talking to a man. Theo slowed down, not because he was nosy, but because the tone of the voices was the kind that made you slow down without deciding to. He's always in the office by 8, the woman was saying. Always. The security logs him in. You could set a clock by it. The garage? The man said. 3rd level. Space 44. He parks himself. No driver. The elevator from parking to lobby. That's the place. A pause. Theo had stopped walking completely. He stood very still with his back against the fence. And you're sure about the building's camera coverage? The man said. I gave you the diagram. I need to hear you say it. The woman's voice went flat and certain, the way adults' voices got when they were past doubt. There's a 12-second blind spot between the stairwell door and the elevator bank on level 3. I've walked it 6 times. 12 seconds is enough. Theo didn't move for a long time after the voices stopped. Then he looked down and saw the paper on the ground near the fence post. A folded piece of paper that must have fallen from the woman's pocket or been dropped in the alley. He picked it up, opened it. It was a diagram, a parking structure, hand-drawn, with measurements in the margins and one space circled in red ink. The number 44 was written inside the circle. Below the diagram in neat handwriting were 2 words. Friday morning. Theo folded the paper back along its creases and put it in his jacket pocket. Then he walked home, ate the leftover pasta his grandmother had left in the refrigerator, and sat at the kitchen table for a very long time trying to decide what to do. The problem was that Theo was 9, and 9-year-olds who go to adults with information that sounds like a movie are not, in his experience, believed. He had told a teacher once about an older kid dealing pills near the school's side entrance, and the teacher had patted his shoulder and said she would look into it, with the particular tone of someone who had already decided not to. He had called 311 once about a broken fire hydrant flooding the basement of their building and been transferred 4 times before the line went dead. Adults had a way of receiving information from children, and then doing nothing with it, and then forgetting that they'd done nothing. But this was different. He understood it was different. The word Friday in the diagram made it urgent in a way that the words in his head couldn't fully organize, but his body understood clearly. His hands were still. He thought about the man with the gray hair who had helped him with the bicycle that morning. Something about the man had stayed with him. The way he'd knelt down on the sidewalk without hesitating, without making a show of it, without treating the situation like an imposition. Adults who knelt down beside you on the sidewalk were a specific category of adult. They were the ones who actually looked at things. He knew the man lived in the brownstone with the green shutters because he'd watched him walk back inside after they'd finished. He didn't know the man's name, but he knew what he looked like, and on Thursday afternoon, after school, Theo stood on the sidewalk across the street from the brownstone and waited. Oliver came home at 6:17. He was carrying his briefcase and a dry cleaning bag, and his phone was wedged between his ear and his shoulder. He was finishing a conversation about a contract dispute, and when he looked up and saw the boy from the bicycle standing on the opposite sidewalk watching him, he paused mid-sentence. "Let me call you back," he said, and hung up. He crossed the street. The boy didn't run or look away, which Oliver took as a good sign. "You fixed your bike," Oliver said. "It's still working," Theo said. Then, without preamble, "I need to show you something." The way he said it stopped Oliver's next sentence before it formed. Not nervous, not performing, just direct, in the manner of someone who had spent 2 days deciding whether to say the words and had finally decided. "Okay," Oliver said. Theo looked up and down the block once. Then he took a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket and held it out. Oliver looked at the diagram for a long time. His face did not change, which was something he had learned to control over decades of sitting across tables from people who were lying to him. But behind the stillness, something was happening that he didn't quite have a word for. "Where did you find this?" he asked. Theo told him. He told him about the alley and the voices and what the woman had said, about 12 seconds and the parking structure and Friday morning. He told it accurately and in order without dramatizing the way he'd rehearsed it in his head. Oliver looked at the circled number 44. His parking space was 44. He looked at the woman's handwriting, Friday morning. And something cold and precise moved through him. He folded the paper carefully. "What's your name?" he asked. Theo. Oliver looked at him for a moment. "How old are you?" 9. Oliver nodded slowly. Did you tell anyone else about this? No, okay. He glanced toward his brownstone, then back at the boy. I'm going to ask you a favor. Don't talk about this. Not yet. Can you do that? Theo said yes. Good. Oliver handed him a business card from his breast pocket. If anything changes, if you see her again, or the man, you call that number, anytime. Theo looked at the card. Oliver Beckett, attorney at law. He put it in his pocket next to where the diagram had been. Oliver did not go to the police that night. It was not a decision he made carelessly. He sat in his kitchen for 2 hours with a glass of water he didn't drink and thought through the shape of what he knew. A diagram, partial, on conveytion. A piece of paper with no names on it. He knew the handwriting was Margaret's. He had known it the moment he looked at the diagram, though he had not said that to Theo. The particular way she formed the number 4, a closed loop at the top, a short vertical stroke, was something he had looked at on grocery lists and birthday cards and sticky notes on the refrigerator for 26 years. What he didn't know was whether going to the police with a piece of paper and a 9-year-old's account of an overheard conversation would accomplish anything, or whether it would simply alert Margaret and whoever Drew Callender and whoever Drew Alander was to the fact that the plan had been discovered. If they knew, the plan would change. The threat would change shape. He wouldn't see it coming the next time. He needed more, and he needed it before Friday. Oliver called a man named Sam Prentice, who was not a lawyer, but who had spent 20 years working in corporate security and knew how to find things without leaving a trail. They had worked together before on cases involving asset concealment and fraud. Sam was discreet and thorough and charged accordingly. I need you to find everything that connects a man named Drew Callender to my wife, Oliver said. Bank records, communications, phone logs if you can get them legally, and I need it in 48 hours. Sam was quiet for a moment. This is personal then. It is? Understood, Sam said. I'll call you tomorrow night. Oliver changed his routine on Friday. He left the brownstone at his usual time, 7:52, dressed in his usual suit, briefcase in hand. He drove to the garage on 5th, took the elevator to the 3rd level, and walked to his parking space. But instead of getting in his car, he got in Sam Prentice's car, which was parked 2 spaces over and facing the elevator bank. Sam had confirmed what needed to be confirmed. Drew Callender had wired 3 payments over the past 6 weeks to a man named Victor Reese, a former corrections officer with a record that included 2 dismissed assault charges and 1 conviction for aggravated battery that had been reduced to a misdemeanor on appeal. Victor Reese drove a gray pickup registered to a holding company with an address in Newark. His phone had pinged a cell tower 2 blocks from Oliver's garage every morning for the past 4 days. Oliver had called a detective named Carol Anspach at the NYPD at 6 a.m. Friday morning. He had given her Sam's documentation. He had told her about the diagram and the parking space and the 12-second blind spot between the stairwell door and the elevator bank. Carol Anspach was a 22-year veteran of the department who did not express surprise easily, and she had not expressed it then. Stay out of that garage, she said. I'll be in the car 2 spaces over, Oliver said. She had started to argue, and he had said gently that he appreciated her concern, and she had understood from his tone that the conversation on that point was over. Victor Reese came through the stairwell door at 8:09. He was a large man, built through the chest and shoulders, wearing a gray jacket that was too warm for October, but practical for other reasons. He moved with the unhurried purpose of someone who had walked through that door in his mind 100 times. He crossed to the elevator bank and pressed the button, and while he waited, he glanced around the level with the systematic habit of a man checking sight lines. He did not notice Sam Prentice's car. He did not notice the 2 plainclothes officers who had arrived in separate vehicles 40 minutes earlier and positioned themselves at the ramp entrance and the stairwell. He noticed the elevator doors opening, which was the moment Detective Anspach stepped out of them with her badge in her hand and 2 officers behind her. Victor Reese had 3 seconds to make a decision. He made the wrong one and ran, got 12 feet, and was stopped by the officer at the stairwell door before he cleared it. Oliver sat in the passenger seat of Sam Prentice's car and watched it happen without expression. That's it, Sam said quietly. Oliver said nothing. Margaret was arrested at their Connecticut house at 8:47 that same morning. Oliver was not there for it. He got the call from Detective Anspach while he was sitting at his desk at the office, and he put down the phone and looked out the window at the skyline for a while before Priya knocked and asked if he wanted coffee. Yes, he said. Thank you. Drew Callender was picked up at his apartment in Tribeca 40 minutes after that. He retained a defense attorney within the hour, which meant he had one on standby, which told Oliver something about the kind of man Drew was and the kind of planning that had gone into all of this. Margaret had not retained anyone when they came for her. She had simply stood in the kitchen of the Connecticut house and been very still. And then she had asked if she could get her coat. The officer had said yes, and she had gotten it. And that was the last image Oliver had of her in that house, standing at the closet in her coat, her back to the door, her hands at her sides. He'd gotten that detail from the officer's report later, and he wasn't sure why he kept returning to it. Oliver found Theo on Saturday afternoon. He'd asked around the block, and his neighbor, a woman named Helen Park, knew Vera from the dry cleaners and gave him the address. Oliver climbed 3 flights of stairs in the building on DeGraw Street and knocked on apartment 3C. And Theo answered, stood in socks and athletic shorts with a math worksheet in his hand. They looked at each other for a moment. "Can I come in?" Oliver asked. Theo stepped back and held the door open. They sat at the kitchen table, which was small and covered in a plastic tablecloth with a fruit pattern. Theo's grandmother, Vera, a stout woman with careful eyes and the particular posture of someone who had worked physical labor for decades and wasn't complaining about it, stood at the counter and listened without speaking for the first several minutes. Oliver told them what had happened. Not everything, and not the most technical parts, but enough. He told them that a man had come to the parking garage and been arrested, that the people who had made the plan were in police custody, that the piece of paper Theo had found and the conversation he had remembered had made it possible to stop something that otherwise would have happened. Vera put her hand flat on the counter. "Lord," she said quietly. Theo looked at Oliver with the steady, slightly measuring look he seemed to use for most things. "Are you okay?" he asked. It was such a simple question, and delivered with such uncomplicated directness that Oliver had to take a breath before he answered. "I'm getting there," he said. Theo nodded, accepting this as an honest answer. Oliver left 2 envelopes on the kitchen table when he stood to go. The first was for Vera, enough to cover 6 months of rent, and a note with the name and number of a scholarship foundation Oliver had helped set up years ago for underserved students in New York City, with a handwritten line explaining that Theo should apply when the time came. The second envelope was smaller. It was addressed to Theo in Oliver's precise, unornamented handwriting, and inside was a single note card that read, "You paid attention to when most people wouldn't have. You said something when most people have said it's quiet. That's not a small thing. Keep doing it. Oh, Beckett." At the door, Oliver paused and turned back. Theo was standing in the middle of the kitchen, holding the note card with both hands, reading it. "The bicycle," Oliver said. "Still running well?" "Yes, sir," Theo said, without looking up. Oliver went down the 3 flights of stairs and out onto DeGraw Street, where the October light was coming at a low angle between the buildings and the trees were at the height of their color, red and amber, and a particular shade of yellow that only happened in that specific 2-week window of fall. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment with his briefcase at his side. He had been a lawyer for 41 years. He had argued in courtrooms and across conference tables and on the phone at midnight before depositions that would make or break multi-million-dollar deals. He had learned over those years to trust very few things implicitly: the text of a contract, the body language of a witness, the consistency of a timeline. He had not expected to add a 9-year-old boy to that list, but there it was. He turned and walked toward the corner, his footsteps steady on the cracked sidewalk, and around him the city moved and breathed the way it always did. Indifferent and alive and full of things happening that no one was watching, except that sometimes someone was watching. Sometimes a kid in socks at a kitchen window was paying attention to exactly the right thing, at exactly the right moment, for reasons that had nothing to do with reward and everything to do with simply knowing that some things mattered enough to act on. Oliver Beckett turned the corner onto Atlantic Avenue and kept walking, and somewhere 2 blocks back, a boy sat at a kitchen table reading a note card that he would keep for the rest of his life.